What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for Young Justice Season 3, the first 3 episodes, otherwise known as Young Justice Outsiders. How this video will work is I will review each episode separately because they are separate episodes, but in the end, I will review them as one episode because it's possible they wanted to make 1 hour long episode and they just released it with 3 different episodes because they did release all 3 episodes on the same day. So basically my opinion on this show in general before I get into the actual reviews is that I love Young Justice. It's probably the best DC TV show ever made, and I didn't always think that, but I did rewatch the show very recently and I loved it. So just to set my opinion for the rest of this review, as well as all the reviews going forward, my expectations for this season were extremely high. So first of all, Young Justice Outsiders, Episode 1, titled Prince's All. The episode begins with the 3-minute clip that was released online around like a week ago, showcasing metahuman trafficking. This girl is abducted and turned into a metahuman and trafficked off to Apocalypse, and then she fights for them, and Black Lightning kills her by mistake. First of all, I do like the metahuman trafficking just because it's a very unique concept and it's very creative how they put that into the show. I don't think any other show, really, DC TV show, dealt with something like metahuman trafficking, so that is very interesting. As for Black Lightning killing her, first of all, it's a great point of development for the character. Like before this episode, Black Lightning wasn't really much of a character in the first 2 seasons of Young Justice or whatever he appeared, but now he definitely is, and I think that moment did a great job at creating him as a character, as well as the next 2 episodes of the season, and it really solidified the tone of the season, which is a little darker than the first 2 seasons just because they're not censored by anything like Cartoon Network. But it's actually not that much darker, even though they didn't really curse and there wasn't that much blood or something like that in the first 2 seasons. I feel like they did a great job at making it mature without actually having to do any of those things. They were censored by Cartoon Network, but I don't think the transition between those 2 seasons and this one is that big of a transition. I do feel like the tone has stayed pretty much consistent with the first 2 seasons of Young Justice, and I love that tone, so I'm definitely glad it stayed. So the Justice League part of the episode is probably my favorite part, where it's revealed that Kaldur is now Aquaman, and he's the leader of the Justice League. The reason he's Aquaman now is because the actual Aquaman, he was splitting his time between being the King of Atlantis and a member of the Justice League, so instead of that, they made him the full-time King of Atlantis, and Kaldur is now Aquaman, and I do like that quite a lot. It makes a lot of sense. Kaldur is a great character, so I like him as Aquaman already. But my favorite scene in the episode comes when the Justice League members, a lot of them, resign from the team. Characters like Batman, Green Arrow, Plastic Man, Batwoman, etc. They all resign from the team, along with Black Lightning, who resigns a little bit later. I love this scene. The scene is very unexpected in terms of what happens. It's a very tense scene as well, and it does a great job at setting up what will happen in this season, which is the title of this whole season, The Outsiders. Because Batman leaves the team, he most likely will begin or found the Outsiders to do what the Justice League can no longer do. The rest of the episode after the whole Justice League resignation thing is definitely not as good. It's mostly just Dick Grayson going around recruiting people like Artemis, Superboy, and Black Lightning, and it doesn't make sense that he just doesn't call them. That being said, I do think these scenes serve a huge purpose of not only developing these characters, but just revealing things about them, such as the fact that Artemis is now living with Roy Harper, aka Red Arrow, and Roy Harper's daughter, as well as the fact that Roy is now trying to be a different person named Will, and he has a beard, so he looks completely different. That's a lot of things we learn about these characters. For Connor, we see Connor propose to M'gann, which is a pretty big deal, and earlier we learned that M'gann is now showing herself as a white Martian, which I probably have to get used to, but it does make a lot of sense. And for Black Lightning, we learned that he has a wife who is his ex-wife, which is the same thing in the Black Lightning TV show. He also has 2 daughters, and we learned that Lynn Stewart, the wife or ex-wife of Black Lightning, is the sister of John Stewart, which is something that was supposed to happen in the comics but never did, and I think this is really awesome that they did it here. So even though it doesn't really make sense that Dick just doesn't call them, I do like these scenes because they serve a huge purpose, and Connor proposing to M'gann is also a pretty huge deal. The only 2 things that I didn't talk about is Markovia, which is mostly set up for the next 2 episodes of the season. I do think that Geoforce, which is Brian Markov, who will become Geoforce, had a pretty great origin story in these episodes, but this specific episode was mostly set up for his character or for the next 2 episodes of the season. The only other thing is the animation and the art style. I saw a lot of reviews before I actually watched these episodes, or like people on Twitter saying that the episodes are great, but the only thing that's not amazing is the art style and the animation, and I don't like fully agree. I do think the art style is great, the animation is great, but it's definitely a step down from the first 2 seasons of Young Justice. Those seasons had incredible animation, incredible art style. Maybe the first couple episodes of season 1, the animation was a little wonky, but after that, they perfected it, and it was great. Here, I do like the art style, the animation is great, but it is kind of a step down from the first 2 seasons of Young Justice, and it's not noticeable most of the time, but I do think the animation is just not as great as the first 2 seasons, and it's probably because of budgetary reasons. Hopefully, they can get a bigger budget if enough people sign up for this universe, for the DC Universe, and watch this show. So, with all of that in mind, I will give the first episode of Young Justice Outsiders an 8.7 out of 10. So next up is episode 2, titled Royal We. The episode begins with this Beast Boy scene, which is not a bad scene, but I really hope Beast Boy in the beginning of each episode basically has a cold open. It doesn't become a thing, because it's a thing in episode 3 as well. Hopefully after that, it stops and Beast Boy can go back to being an actual character on this show. That being said, right after that, there is the whole UN meeting scene, which I do like that a lot. We see that Aqualad, or Tempest, is the ambassador of Atlantis, and Donna Troy is the ambassador of Themyscira. I don't think we've ever seen Donna Troy ever before, so that is pretty cool, and I like this scene a lot. I like the diplomatic part of this season so far. I think they're handling it pretty well. The rest of the episode continues where episode 1 left off, with Nightwing, Artemis, Superboy, and Black Lightning going on a mission in Markovia, a covert operation, which this show does usually do incredibly well, and they did this in order to combat the metahuman trafficking in Markovia. So like I said, the show does usually do covert operations incredibly well. They're just so fun to watch, and that's just because they had to master it, just because the whole purpose of the team was to be more covert than the Justice League. However, I do feel like in this episode they just didn't do it as well as the first 2 seasons. Maybe it's because of the mind link, maybe that just makes it more interesting, or maybe just because they're in costume it's more interesting. Maybe the actual character interactions, because here it's just Nightwing, Artemis, and Superboy, as well as Black Lightning. It might be missing some key members. I can't really place 100% why. I just feel like the covert operation mission in this episode isn't nearly as good as Young Justice usually did in the first 2 seasons of Young Justice. That being said, it is still pretty good, just not as good as usual. Also, it's possible that it just felt like the entire time they were setting up the next episode, which again, it's not a huge problem for this episode. It's still a pretty great episode, but it is easily the weakest of the 3. So I don't really feel like there's much else to talk about this episode until the end, where in the end there is supposed to be this misdirect where Count Vertigo is back. That is pretty cool, and I think this makes a lot of sense that he is involved in this whole operation. But he calls this guy, who is obviously his boss, he's working for him, and he calls him Your Highness. Now we are led to believe as an audience that he is calling Gregor, the brother of Bryon, Geoforce, whatever, and I don't think this misdirect worked very well, because I never believed for a second that his brother was evil. It was pretty obvious that the uncle was, because in all these monarchy stories, there was always the brother or something like that was jealous of his brother or sister on the throne and wanted to claim the throne for himself and would do anything for that. Now, it didn't seem like he was very interested in the throne in episode 3. It was more about just metahuman trafficking, but it was pretty obvious from the beginning that he had malicious intent. Which means that the misdirect, if it even was a misdirect, I'm not 100% certain that they even tried to do a misdirect at all, but if it was, then it just wasn't nearly as good as they intended it to be. So again, this episode is easily the worst out of the 3 episodes, so I would give it an 8.3 out of 10. Last but not least is episode 3, titled Imminent Threat. The episode begins similarly to episode 2, with Beast Boy in the beginning, and this time he has an interview, which is a pretty long interview compared to the scene at the beginning of episode 2, where he talks to Stargirl. Although this is nothing like the Stargirl from the comics, it's possible that over the course of this season, this character will become Stargirl, like the actual Stargirl. That is possible, but again, I don't really like these Beast Boy scenes. I really hope they don't become a thing, but this scene revealed that he is dating Queen Perdita, and they met at Wally West's funeral, which I did like that, actually. I did like that quite a lot, but in general, I really hope this doesn't become a thing. But anyway, moving on to the rest of the episode. This episode revealed that Delam is behind Bedlam, which again I did see coming. Nevertheless, I did actually like the scene where he was revealed, and throughout this episode we saw the Geoforce origin story, which we did see in the first 3 episodes of the season, and I did really like that origin story. I feel like this character could be a pretty great character in this season. He had a good motivation. He became Geoforce to protect his country and his sister, who in the comic is actually Terra, and considering she was abducted by people who traffic metahumans, she will probably have Terra's powers and become Terra in this show, so that is definitely something to look forward to. But his whole motivation was based off that, and the fact that his parents were murdered, which we did see, I think, in the first episode. I'm pretty sure it was in episode 1, and that was insane. I mean, I did say that this episode was not, or this season was not that much darker, but that scene, I mean, it was pretty bloody compared to the first 2 seasons of Young Justice. So that whole motivation was great. Markov becoming Geoforce in this season, like in this episode, him getting these powers and adjusting to these powers and fighting the Lamb, all of that was handled really, really well. And again, I am pretty excited to see Geoforce in the future of the season. He's never really been in anything before. I've seen him in the comics before, but I've never seen him in a TV show or an anime TV show, because I don't think he's ever been in one. So they're using a pretty unique character in Geoforce that I do think could be very interesting. He's actually probably less popular than his sister Terra, but either way, this episode and the first 3 episodes of the season did a pretty great job introducing us to this character. So at the end of the episode, there's this huge fight scene between Geoforce and Delam, which is a great fight scene. It also showcases Geoforce's origin story a little bit more, his motivation a little bit more, and his brother Gregor becoming the real king of this country. But then there's the fight scene between Nightwing, Artemis, Black Lightning, and Halo, the new character, versus these metahuman traffickers, along with Count Vertigo and Plasmus. This was a pretty great fight scene. It showcased Halo as this new character. I do like her powers quite a lot, and there's this one moment in the fight that is probably my favorite moment from the entire hour-long episode, or the 3 episodes at the beginning of the season, which is when Halo just used her powers for the first time, or used her powers fully, where she started floating in the air. She glowed yellow, but then she was grabbed by Plasmus, and her skin was completely burned off. This was insane. I did not see this coming. I genuinely thought in the moment that they pulled a plot twist, where even though they marketed Halo in the marketing, it turns out she's killed off immediately, and she isn't actually a character in this season. That would have been insane. It would have been very Game of Thrones of them to do that. It's something that Game of Thrones does, and it really shocks everybody every single time. It would have been great in this moment. Now, this moment was insane. Even though they did bring back Halo from the dead, they really wanted to use her as a character, which I really don't have any problem with them bringing her back. And either way, this is a great moment. It also serves as some great character development for Black Lightning. So in general, amazing moment, probably my favorite moment from this entire first 3 episodes of the season, and this whole fight scene between all these characters is a great fight scene. So I will give the 3rd episode of Young Justice Outsiders a 9 out of 10. So those are my reviews for the first 3 episodes of Young Justice Outsiders. Now, if you want to count this as one long episode, at the beginning of the season, the first episode of the season, then it is pretty much the same. I mean, this episode is a great way to start the season, showcasing the status of the world, showcasing the status of the Justice League, showing the metahuman trafficking. They did that very well, and giving origin stories to characters like Halo and Geoforce, giving some great development to characters like Black Lightning, creating him as a character, making him a better character. Now, this episode didn't really do a very good job with showcasing the actual team, Young Justice, or whatever you want to call them, which they're not actually called that, they're just called the team. They were barely in it, which I really hope they are in future episodes of this season. The animation's a little bit worse than the previous seasons were, and the art style is definitely worse, and on top of all that, there is the actual intro, which I love the intro for Season 1. I pretty much like the intro for Season 2, and I think this intro is just not as good. I feel like, I mean, it's a good intro, but only once. I feel like the intro in Season 1 and 2, I could watch that every single episode. For this one, I feel like skipping it, every single time, so that is one thing. Now, that's basically not even a problem in the slightest. That's just the intro. But anyway, I will give this episode an 8.9 out of 10, which is slightly higher than the average of these 3 reviews, just because I do think it worked more as an hour-long episode than it did as 3 episodes, which are each 20 minutes. So anyway, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. I will leave multiple polls, one for each episode, in the top right corner of the video for you to vote on. But if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.